get us started, I'm Angie McKinney. I am a school psychologist by background and a special ed administrator by background, and am a consultant with the Indiana IEP Resource Center. So for those of you who are out of state, the Indiana IEP Resource Center is a state center that really does nothing but support schools around the state for free with technical assistance, training, and we also support use of the state's sponsored IEP system that's online. So pretty much all districts in Indiana, they don't have to, but pretty much everybody uses the same system, which is kind of cool when we get students that hop from district to district. And we, we can transfer records very easily then. So how many of you are actually from Indiana? Okay, good. I like this. This is Gail Ringwald. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm also from the Indiana IEP Resource Center and do facilitated IEPs. I was a teacher for 22 years, so always in special ed. So I've been in a lot of case conferences. And I find this process always really rewarding to be able to help people work through the process, hopefully positively.
And we also have a couple of panelists that are going to be sharing some stories later. I'm going to wait to introduce them until we get into talking about some of the experiences from the field. And they're at very different ends of kind of using facilitated IEP. So as far as who you guys are, how many are in special ed teaching in the classroom? Okay, administrators? Gen Ed? No Gen Ed. That's so sad. But
you all have Gen Ed teachers come to your conferences, right?
Absolutely. Oh, please tell me yes.
I'm in the co-taught room, so
okay.
Oh, okay. Stay back, but it'll be here.
Any roles that I've missed? Student? Wonderful, and we're glad to have you, definitely.
I'm a college professor.
College professor. All right. Well, I told you a little bit about the IEP Resource Center, and doing facilitated IEP meetings is just a very small piece of what we do, but we do feel like it's a very important part. The state of Indiana at one point had sponsored tons of training to get people out there using facilitated IEPs. But we kind of ran into a snag because lots of people got trained. People developed good skills for running their own case conferences. And the idea was that we're going to trade manpower. If you needed a facilitated conference, somebody from my district might come to you and help out. And then when I need one, I'm going to hope that somebody will come to me and help out. Well, that was a logistical nightmare. It never happened, right? We had enough trouble keeping up with our own stuff to trade anybody across districts. And it was also still kind of an issue that if you're coming from another district, parents had a hard time believing you were coming in as a neutral person to a case conference. And they may have been right. You're a little bit jaded when you come in and you've at least had the same kind of experiences in your own district and you usually have an opinion. And that it's important for us that we don't have an opinion. Well, we do have an opinion, but we try to at least, squash that opinion while we're helping to run meetings. So some of the things that have come up as far as issues that occur that lead to those negative meetings, negative relationships, a lot of things related to communication. People on either side saying, I feel like I get cut off, like I'm not heard, nobody's listening to what I'm saying. Issues around how to handle those headbutting moments where we're just not agreeing. And I think a lot of times we go into a conference saying there is no way we're going to reach an agreement because parents want this, the school wants this, or sometimes it's the principal wants this, the classroom teacher wants this, and it's very different. For whatever reason, we don't often handle those differences of opinion very well. Power struggles, sometimes it's the fight is the issue. It's not about what I really want, it's about I want to win. Dealing with emotions. I'm a parent, but my child does not have a disability. It's been a pretty easy ride in my life. But I know that I can go into schools and I can be very calm and level-headed, unless it's my daughter's school. And when I walk in the door, my hands are trembling, I'm sweaty. You know, my emotions get the best of me, even when I'm going in for good things. And I don't know why that is. But, you know, parents who are fighting the good fight for, I just want what's best for my kid, their emotions are really intense. Some of the other issues come around preparation. So how many of you have been to a case conference where you walk in the door and you're the only one with your stuff ready? Right? Sometimes people come in, they don't have any data with them, they didn't bring the file. Oh, I thought you were bringing the laptop, right? Or the room is full of testing materials for the upcoming testing season and we've got to move it all out of the way. All of those kinds of things come up.
Or they come in and somebody says, who are we here for? Like, okay, really, this is not a good way to start. If you're a parent, you want to make sure everybody knows who your child is. That's important to you.
Issues around clarity and being transparent, which overlap quite a bit. Making sure that we all read what's in the IEP and we're on the same page for what that meant was going to happen. Some of those things lead to a lot of negative outcomes. And then just issues around respect. I have been in meetings where I've had somebody say, oh, please, did you really just roll your eyes at me and be called out in front of everyone else? You know, those things happen. I was at another meeting where two school people who had internal messaging on their computers were sending messages back and forth about the parent. And I could see it. The parent never saw it, but it's a matter of respect. Or parents who will intentionally you know, say really negative things to a teacher. I had a parent once who said, you know, I don't know why my kid is like this. I told her that fat people are really nice too, and talking about the teacher. It was very intentional, very hurtful things that were said in disguise of I'm just talking. So lots of things that come up, and these are some of the things that we try to help with by sending in a facilitator. So we send a trained person, and we do have some training in this, and we have ongoing discussions among our team members about, you know, what's working, what do we need to work on internally. But we're impartial in the sense that nobody's paying us to come in. The parents don't pay a dime, the school doesn't pay a dime. We're impartial in the sense that we try to get as little information about the situation before we go in. I generally I don't want to know the disability area, I don't want to know the issue unless it's so big that I'm going to have to kind of prep for, you know, potential tools to use. But we want to come in as neutral as possible and realize that we've got no stake in the outcome. No matter what is decided, it doesn't affect us in any way. And we need to make sure that both the school know that and the parents as well. We use an agenda and ground rules. Standard. We laminated these things, you know, big sheets, because we use the same thing every time, because the agenda is the IEP process. But oftentimes in meetings, we see that people jump around in the IEP. We start talking about present levels like we're supposed to, and then suddenly we're talking about placement issues before we've ever developed goals or services. We've got to follow that order of the IEP that's been laid out for us.
And we do have, all of us that facilitate, have a different way of making sure we identify those questions when they come up. So if somebody brings up a question about placement and we say, okay, no, you're going to have to stop because we're still talking about present levels, we will write that question so that by the end, when we get there, we can talk about it. Because sometimes when people have those questions, if you don't have a way to identify it, they can think of nothing else because they're going to have to try to remember what their question was. So it gets them back in the conversation if we have a way to, like a parking lot, or I use a red marker and write it so then I can like view the notes I'm taking and make sure we get back to it.
We use our ground rules that we kind of negotiate ahead of time. We have very specific ones that we bring in because they tend to work with most meetings. And then I've had meetings where we add some, or there have been times where we cross one out because the group really didn't want to have that ground rule. But by agreeing on these ground rules ahead of time, when you do enforce them and say, wait a minute, we're not there yet, we need to follow the process, nobody gets offended. Or when two people are talking at the same time and I step in and say, remember, you guys agreed to the ground rule that we were going to talk one person at a time, or we were going to disagree respectfully, or whatever the particular rule is that's just been violated. I mean, I've not had anyone yet just, throw up their hands that they're upset that they've been scolded, because, I use a lot of humor sometimes in the beginning to say, now, I may have to come back and enforce these, so promise you're not going to get mad about this.
And one of the big things, one thing that I noticed, and you've probably all done it before, and I have stopped, is when people have those side conversations. And so that is one of the things that we say, no. Now, you can stop, and I have stopped and said, okay, if you guys want to talk, we can leave, the rest of us, or you can leave, and people have taken a break. And once they realize that that's okay, they kind of stop. But that can really undermine some of those things Angie talked about before, like communication and respect and transparency, if you have people whispering, both parents and teachers and administrators.
And sometimes the side conversations are bad, we're whispering about something. And sometimes it's a teacher has an idea and turns to their colleague and says, oh wait, I know how we could do this and we could do this better in the classroom. And they're having a side conversation that's very productive, but it's still, to the other eyes, they're over there whispering, or they're not listening to what I'm saying to the larger group. So it's definitely important that we establish all of the things that are needed to keep that communication going, keep everyone focused on the student, and keep the movement of the meeting happening.
Right, and again, if the parent brings an advocate, it's important if they need to talk to their advocate, that is an important thing to do. But again, you don't want them whispering right there, because not only does it look bad to everybody else, but they're missing the rest of the conversation.
Yeah. One of the rules that I tend to use are ask questions if you have them and share information freely. So holding things back, we've seen a lot of meetings where we thought it was all out on the table. We thought we came to an agreement, and a week later we get a letter from somebody saying, yeah, but, because they didn't add the information out. I tell people, if you look like you have a question, I'm probably going to stop and say, you look like you have a question, what might that be? Because if you're more of an internal person, you may just be processing things and not come out and say it unless somebody gives you the opportunity to actually express it.
Right, and remember, like educators, we have our own language, right? We use a lot of acronyms and we use a lot of teacher talk. And so you have to remember that a parent might not always know all those things, so you have to kind of remember who you're talking to. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor, you ask them, please speak in English because I don't know what you're talking about. So we have to remember that, because we kind of get carried away in our own jargon. And I can sometimes, often I look at a parent and think, they are just not getting it. So then I try to stop and say, okay, can you say that again?
Well, and for us, being the special ed group, we talk in special ed specific language, and sometimes our gen ed counterparts have no idea what we're talking about either. So we tend to kind of play like we don't understand. I'll say, now, what is NWEA again? I know what NWEA is, but I know that the parent might not, or somebody else in the room might not. So we ask a lot of questions that way to put it back on us as the facilitator, and try not to make anybody feel like they, don't have the knowledge, right? Because that can be embarrassing for somebody. There are lots of times in this world that I don't ask a question just because I don't want to look stupid, right?
Or we also restate things. You can see somebody kind of thinking, what did they say? So I will say, I heard you say, and then that way, sometimes saying it another way, just like with kids in a classroom. It's like, oh, okay, or it brings up a question because that's not what they thought it was.
So again, some of the important pieces are just to give everyone a voice. What we do is very simple. It's not rocket science that, facilitating a conference. It's just that we have a very specific purpose while we're there, and that's the only purpose we have. We're not involved in the content, but we also make sure that everyone has a voice. So when I get agreement about something, I tend to not say, okay, are we all okay to move on? Okay, let's move on, because I didn't hear any no's. If it's something really specific and I know it's been a hang up, then I'm probably going to go around and say, are you okay with this? I'm waiting for a nod. Okay, are you all right with this? And I go completely around the room, because just because I didn't respond doesn't mean I agree. So I may ask for a thumbs up, and sometimes we use things like, well, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or if you're not quite there yet, but you need some more information. It's whatever it takes to get those agreements and move forward and make sure that we have moved through the entire process so that by the end of the meeting, we know we're getting a signature or we're taking the next step, whether it's moving on to, something legal. So we have some districts that use this preventatively. They know a meeting is coming up that's going to be a little complicated, rough, that there's so much to consider. We also have a lot of meetings, and probably most of our meetings we have a long history of really difficult meetings. So we've met 4 times already and we can't seem to reach an agreement, or we've had a complaint already and we've been asked to come in and facilitate the next meeting.
Okay, and one thing about our facilitations is that nobody's going to be surprised. On our request form, both the school and the parent have to sign to say, yes, they agree to have the conference facilitated, so that it's not like a parent asks us to come and we show up and the school doesn't know. So that doesn't help with your being neutral. So they're on the form, both parties have to agree. I don't think I've ever yet had anybody not agree. Sometimes schools will call if they've never had one, just to clarify exactly what it is.
I have had some not agree. I've had several times where the school has requested and the parent did not want for it to happen, and so they didn't sign, and that's okay, because it's not anywhere in Indiana law. It is in the law in some states that we're going to do this process as part of any legal proceedings. It's not mentioned anywhere in Indiana. It's strictly voluntary. We've also had some times where a parent has asked for a facilitated IEP, and a school has said, you know what? We want to give it a chance to do it on our own first. If it doesn't work out, then we're going to call you. And generally when that happens, the school hasn't called back or the parent hasn't called back. So.
Right, sometimes new directors or new people, the parent has had a bad relationship with the previous one, and so the new one says, hey, I want to try to resolve it to help, build this relationship rather than have an adversarial one from the beginning. And so, like Angie said, a lot of times we don't hear from them again, which we're glad.
So again, our role is strictly to facilitate the process of the meeting. The school is still completely running the IEP. They're doing the typing, the note-taking, they're developing everything. We do a whole lot of charting, but then we take our charts and shred them afterwards. So we're just there to keep things visual and keep everything flowing. What we're not doing is giving any kind of legal advice, other than there are a few times when we've kind of been stopped in the middle of conferences to say, can we do this? And that's been questions from the parents, the advocates, the school. They just want an Article 7 clarification. It's not really legal advice about should I move for a due process or something like that. It's strictly how is this in the law? And there are some times where we've kind of stepped out of our role to say, let's look this up and make sure that we're all doing the right thing. We don't impose any kind of decisions. It's not like a hearing officer or anything like that. And in fact, sometimes schools have been generating kind of crummy IEPs, but everyone's happy. It's not our role to get in there and say,
that's hard.
It is really hard. But, that wasn't our purpose at the meeting. And we don't take sides.
And we can't police it at the end. So like I tell parents when I introduce myself before the conference that whatever comes out at the end, if, say, the school, you don't think they're following what we all agreed on or what was agreed on, I cannot be responsible for making sure or following through with that district to say, hey, you aren't doing what you said you were. That's not our role. So you would have to then do the next thing.
So we've got a lot of benefits that are out there of using this process. Obviously, we aren't at every case conference, a tiny percentage for our little core staff to be able to get out there and do this. But we see a lot of better relationships between the school and the parent. We've had, a lot of good feedback from schools and from parents that this really helped the situation. In fact, we've come out of conferences thinking, oh my gosh, that was rough. And as we're leaving, the parent would come up to us and say, that was the best conference we've ever had. And then the school comes by and says, that was the best conference we've ever had. You made that parent behave, right? Or you made that teacher behave. And I think it's just the fact that we're there.
We just stand in the room.
It's not anything that we're doing. It's that presence of, okay, we all know that things haven't been going well. We need to shape it up.
Right.
So we get a lot better follow through, a lot more agreements on things, and I think people feel like we truly did come out with an agreement instead of just I conceded to this IEP. So here's some of the things from Indiana. We've seen both referrals coming from the school side and the parent side, and it's been pretty equal of all the facilitated IEP requests that we've gotten. And in fact, a lot of times they're marking that they both are initiating it together. They've made a decision that they want this to happen. And I think that's a really good thing. A lot of our parent referrals have come through information that's been provided through InSource, which is our state's parent resource. They provide information and training and support for our parents around the state. We've had several that have come out of either a due process or a complaint that part of that resolution is we really think you ought to have a facilitated conference to make sure you get all the pieces and parts in your next IEP. We have a lot that have required multiple meetings. Now, we also have some repeats that we did it last time and it worked great, so let's do it again this time. But we have others that we've gone 4 or 5 hours and said, let's stop and we're gonna have a second meeting and finish it out because it's just, it's time intensive and usually it's because there are some big issues when that's happened. But we've had a lot of positive response. I can only think of one case in the last 4 years that people were not happy with how it came out. Everything else has been pretty smooth, and that's a little surprising, I guess, but positive that what we're doing is good. We also looked at what different states are doing, and it does continue to grow. And at different meetings that I've been at, I've heard other people talking about it. Well, in my state, we have these different centers that are doing facilitated meetings. We only had one study really to look at. There's not a whole lot out there about facilitated IEP, but as recent as 4 years ago, over half the states in the United States have some form of facilitated IEP, whether it's voluntary like our state, whether it's part of their code. It changes from state to state. And then at the time, 15 states had been offering it for a long period of time, so they were really holding on to it, which again I think is a real positive. So we thought, we wanted to share information about what we do here and what it actually is in case you're coming in completely from the ground floor of not having been part of it. We're also hoping maybe some of you out there have experienced a facilitated IEP and might want to share some information. But we wanted to get a couple stories from our 2 panelists. So we have Lisa Paddock, who is with the Indiana Department of Education, and I'll let you share a little more. And then also Kelly Wilder, who is a director in one of our districts here in Indiana that has used the process. So we're going to start with Lisa and just let her share kind of her experience with this.
Thanks, Angie. Well, going back a little bit, I was actually one of the people that was trained years ago to be a co-facilitator back when it was set up similarly but a little different. And then there was that lag, and I personally was very thrilled to see it come back. So I work for InSource, which is Indiana's Resource Center for Families with Special Needs, and we're the Parent Training Center for Indiana. And then I'm actually embedded at the Department of Education, which is a very unusual thing. I think Indiana is ahead of that game in order to partner with parents. So I have also been with InSource about 15 years or so, and at the department 10. So as this program came up and was reinvented again, I think that I would like to share that the way Indiana looks at this is it can be part of that dispute process as far as it could be individual, just we're going to meet together, or have you considered? So when our staff get a call or I get a call and someone is not happy, one of the very first things we talk about is what's gone on. And then we also talk about the fact this is a voluntary process, but perhaps it would be a really good way to get everyone's voice heard. So we send out information on FIEPs a lot and direct families or community stakeholders, schools, whoever, if they don't know, to the website to look about it. Because a lot of times the question is, why would I do that? Well, you would do that if perhaps you're feeling like, and they very nicely have a list of why. Why would we do this? So in general, one of the first things that we talk about is it's voluntary. So hopefully both sides will agree, but every once in a while we have one where they won't, but at least it's considered. And I think consideration is really, really important in that. And the majority of times, both school and family go through that process. And I would say, you know, there are a few times it's been a little rockier in that result, but in general, I would say it's been overwhelmingly successful. When I have talked to schools and I've talked to families, both, they have felt that even if perhaps they didn't come to an agreement, which most of the times I feel like they have, it has helped sort out things for them. It has helped let them know whether to move further in the dispute process. Or perhaps maybe they decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to the table with my director, sometimes with or without an InSource staff, perhaps sometimes a community person with them, because this helped us narrow down more what our concern was. And so I have seen it personally, and I think our staff would say, in general, be very successful. Even generally there's an agreement, but even if there's not, to be able to say, okay, we now have defined some things more. We've had someone else be that facilitator and assist with this situation. And one of the things that we make very clear to parents is this is not a due process hearing. It is not a mediation per se, but they are there to help facilitate the concerns and get discussions going to make a decision of where things are going to go. And what I personally hear, and I would guess our staff do, is I really felt like my voice was heard. No matter what the outcome, I felt my voice was heard, and I was able many times to be able to understand whether I agree or not with all the parties. I was able to understand where they're coming from and perhaps why that discussion had come to the table or maybe hadn't yet.
I think it's been helpful for our Department of Ed staff when they get those calls, either from the school or from the parent, to have another option, to not just say, well, you know, you can file a complaint or you can file for due process, because that's no fun for anyone. I mean, if you've ever been through a complaint or a due process, even on the parent end, it's not fun and it's costly and it's taking you away from everything that you want to be doing for kids and teaching time and, you know, even prepping for a due process hearing. You get people out of the classroom for hours and hours and hours just to sit and get prepped. And that's not good.
Okay, I'm Kelly Wilder again, and I'm the Director of Special Education for Tippecanoe School Corporation in Lafayette. And I am definitely on the other end of that. I would say I'm probably a habitual facilitated IEP user. And primarily when we use it, where we're at, it's because we have come to some serious trust issues between the family and the school. And that trust has been broken, and either the family and or the school are feeling like it's not going to be repaired by just keep coming back to the table over and over. So at that point, we ask for the facilitated case conference, for the facilitators to come in and just sit down. And it's helped, I think, in all of our situations. We've had several because of legal things that have happened, because families have had numerous complaints or due processes. And again, that trust has been broken. And then we've had a few just because things haven't gone well in previous conferences. I think that the definite benefits that we've seen is that we can get things agreed on in one meeting or maybe two meetings, rather than we have this false sense of agreement and then 2 or 3 days later we're getting emails, letters, phone calls that this is not what we agreed upon. So that visual process that Angie was talking about earlier has been very important for us, being able to see that visual agreement. And sometimes, we just put that letter A that we've agreed on all of these things, and so we can move on. And so that when they show up in IEPs, teachers and parents alike can be like, oh yeah, we did agree on that. We have it, we had that there. And then I think going back to what they were saying about communication as well, communication, a lot of times in these trust, conflicts that we have, parents say, I wasn't heard. My side of the story wasn't heard. You cut me off, or I didn't feel comfortable talking with all of these people in this room. And so having a facilitator in there, I think, has just kind of helped parents, whether they have an advocate or not, feel like that they have a voice and the school is listening to them. So I think that that's been very beneficial for us. We have students and families that we have, I think, every conference over, several years have always been facilitated, just because we have found that has helped the process along, helped us come to agreements quicker, helped keep the school corporation out of legal problems with those families. So we have continued doing that, and then we always have new families and situations popping up that we will continue to use the process for. It's been wonderful for us.
I know we have one family in particular that, what have we had, about 4?
I think we did 4 last year, and we've done one
between last year and this year at least. And as a facilitator coming in, I'm like, oh, they can do it themselves now. But I think it's more comfortable until this kiddo graduates. Yep. We're just going to keep doing it because it's working.
Yeah.
And it does. You're right. It creates that trust that, we're all going to work for what this kid needs, as opposed to for what I want or what you want.
It's really helped that family feel like regain the trust in the school that they had once lost. So it's been very positive.
I will share a story too that I had a set of twins that we facilitated a case conference. They had come into a school district, and the mother asked for a case conference because there were some big issues, big issues. And we used a facilitated IEP, and the meeting went beautifully, or meetings. It's hard on identical twins, back-to-back meetings, to keep it all straight, but incredibly important to the parent that we do. So had those meetings, got the IEPs in place, and within about a month, they moved, and they moved about 3 hours away. And when the parent got to the new district for the moving conference, said, you know what, can we please use facilitated IEP? And we did, and we facilitated up there. And then they moved back to the original district, and the parent and the school both called me and said, you know what, we're going to try it without you. And the parent called me afterward and said, "You wouldn't believe it. We did it just like you did it when you were here, and it worked great." They used ground rules. They used an agenda. They had good communication. And I think it was because everyone at the table was making just such a concerted effort to say, this is important. This is what's going to make it work in this relationship with this family. And I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, and I will share that I've been at facilitated conferences where students have led their case conferences and just been a little bit nervous and not had the greatest time the first time, thinking they didn't really know how to navigate all the adults. And the parent said, "Thank you," and the kid did an amazing job. I was very impressed with this 8th grader. So that's another possibility.
So how many of you have actually been to a facilitated meeting? Do you have anything that you'd want to add? Or do you facilitate?
No, so, we use kind of a modified version, I think. So some people from our district went to a training and got trained on it. So my administrator is leading the meetings as the facilitator, so we don't have an outside impartial person coming in. And most of our meetings we have really good relationships with our families to begin with for what we have in our classroom right now. So, but the thing that I have really liked about it, just it's a small thing, but when everyone shares their role at the table, and the parent, every time, because we've been doing it this whole school year, the parents go, "I'm the parent," and we say, "Yeah, but your role is you're here to advocate for your child's needs," and they're like, "Oh, that is my role here." And that's just kind of fun to see them think about, like, that meaningfulness of why they're there, and that we're respectful of the fact that they're there to speak on their child's behalf. So
that's beautiful.
It's nice, yeah.
So when I was first trained, I was trained probably about the same time that Lisa was trained, and I was working within a district, and I was using it within my district, typically at schools that weren't mine, right? So as a psych, I was assigned to certain schools, and when problems would come up in other schools, I'd get asked to come in and help out. But again, I was not seen as a neutral person because I was an employee, and it still could be very helpful. It just wasn't exactly what we needed. But we realized at the center too that we're not trainers of facilitated IEP, but the stuff that we do, anybody can do. And so we started training on effective case conference processes and have put out some training on that, which are free, recorded, and available on our YouTube channel at the Indiana IEP Resource Center. So please check that out. And it goes over exactly that. Go over your role, share what you do, share why you're at the table. If you've got your laptop open, share why. It's not that I'm online shopping, right? It's what is my role? If I'm the note taker, if I'm the IEP person, why do I have that open? And if not, shut your computer, right?
It's things like greeting the parent when they come, and don't have them be the last person in the room. Sometimes when I'm doing the training, people will look at me like, "Oh my gosh, that is so easy. Why didn't I ever think of it?" But if you think about it, what happens when you come into the room and you're last? Everybody turns to look at you, and then they've all been talking about you, even if they haven't. That's what you think. So try to do things like that little things can make the difference.
I've also sat in lots of case conferences where we were in like a preschool room, and the chairs are like this high, and everyone's, trying to get down, and getting up is the hard part.
I am too old to sit in kindergarten chairs for 2 or 3 hours.
And then the administrator comes in and sits in the rolly office chair, right? And it's sitting like a foot above everyone else. And that's a power play. And that's not fair to parents. And that's not fair to the teachers, We have to make sure that things like that don't set up those power differentials. Or, when we come in and we say, okay, well, let's introduce everybody. This is Mrs. Smith. This is Mr. So-and-so. This is Dr. Ringwald. And this is Mom, right? Or this is Sherry. That in and of itself can say, we have the power, you don't. And it just leads to that relationship, little cracks that start to build up over time and create a poor situation, and the outcomes are generally not as good.
Right, and it also helps when you know your parents, if you have mom and dad that are divorced or don't get along, but they're both willing to come to the table, don't sit them next to each other. You know, those kinds of little things that you can take care of before that will help you with your outcomes.
Yeah, we definitely would recommend that don't bring the parent in last, but also make sure that there are a couple of seating options for parents so they can choose their seat. So if they want to sit mom and dad together, or a parent and advocate together, that they have the opportunity to do that. Or, you know, there are a lot of parents that come in that have that one teacher that they don't even want to make eye contact with. Don't sit them beside that person, you know. Or, you know, some of our tables are set up where one person is like on display and then everyone else is kind of facing them. And then sometimes you've got like your projector or your charts are all behind the parent and they're spending their time doing this while everyone is viewing them. And just a lot of little things that don't seem like they're that big, but they can make such a huge difference in how the meeting goes. So I know we had some questions kind of developed. So think about the most perfect IEP meeting that you ever had, that you walked out thinking, wow, we just rocked that one. What made it go well?
Prior relationship. I honestly.
Having that prior relationship.
Yeah, prior relationship and good communication between the school and the family. You know, you think of things like daily home notes for students that are the most challenging, but, you know, we use a daily home note with, you know, a student with multiple disabilities because he has a need for it, and the parent relationship there is so fantastic, just because they know they're always getting feedback and they feel like they're a part of the process.
I think allowing parents just to talk as well. I've been in some IEP meetings where parents get cut off frequently of like, well, at this school, this is how we do things. And we had a parent come in with an advocate. I'm new to the school that I'm at, and she came in with an advocate because I guess that's what happened in the past at the school. And she was ready to fight back this year, it felt like. And then just like, well, asking like, well, what do you want for your kid?
Yeah.
What do you want, like, in 10 years from now, best possible outcomes on everybody? What are you going to tell us about your kid if I run into you at the grocery store? And then, like, just having her have space to talk about that, and then her concerns. And then the advocate at the end was just like, I wasn't really needed here. But, like, having just giving that space to have the parents talk made it, like, what started out feeling really tense to being like, wow, this is really productive.
Unfortunately, in our Indiana IEP, there is a section near the beginning just called Parent Concerns. And I think a lot of our teachers just hit that point in the IEP and say, what are your concerns? And that it kind of sets things on a negative tone. And we've encouraged them to say, yeah, I know what it says, and definitely record all parent concerns throughout the meeting, not just in that 2-minute window, but to ask them, what do you want? What do you want to see happen? I think that's a beautiful way of saying it, because it just sets the tone for the meeting of, you know, what do you want your kid to be able to do next year that they can't do now? What do you want them to be able to do when they graduate high school or graduate with a certificate? You know, whatever the case may be, where do you see them? You know, what are your hopes and dreams? And it allows them to think positively and to not talk about, my concerns are, you're not doing this, and he's getting in trouble for that, and I'm tired of these phone calls coming home. You know, all the things that tend to be negative.
I think another thing too is just having that relationship and having them be a part of the draft. I think we're all told to come to the table with a draft made, but in my opinion, the parent should have had a part in participating in writing that draft. So I always make it a point to start my draft like a month ahead of time and then be emailing back and forth with the parent. This is what I'm thinking for this. What do you think? Or I see this going on, at school. Do you agree? So that when we sit down at the table, there's really not, I didn't share the draft with them ahead of time, but there's no aspect of the draft that we haven't previously discussed. As far as parent concerns, I ask and these are the things I'm thinking about to address your concerns. How do you feel about that? Nobody likes to be put on the spot at the table or at the meeting, and I feel like often that's, when we come and we have a draft, they feel like they're put on the spot and this has already all been decided. So having that relationship and having them have say in the draft before you sit down, I think eliminates a lot of that too, because really then you're just sitting down at the table going over everything you've already discussed. There's not a lot of questions left open.
Beautiful. And who else gets left out of being truly feeling like they're part of the IEP team or the case conference, depending on your terminology? The student, especially when they're older, somebody else. There's one role in particular that I think never seem to know why I even have to come to the case conference. Gen Ed. Honestly, a lot of times when I ask gen ed teachers, what's your role here? Like, I don't know, I got the memo, right, that I'm the child's teacher for whatever class or multiple classes, but they really sometimes don't know what their role is. And I think when we prep them for that, and then when we, as we're going around the table, say, share your role, they can say, you know what, I see this kid for this class. I can tell you what classroom behavior is like. I'm the expert on the content for that grade level, the academic standards, because the special ed teacher is usually having to cover multiple grade levels, multiple subjects, and you cannot be the expert on every academic standard out there. You'd have to have, genius memory to do that. And they are the comparison factor for a lot of kids. Let me tell you what your kid can do. Let me tell you all the wonderful things that are going on. And let me tell you what the typical kid without a disability is doing in my class. Because sometimes they're very close and the parent needs to hear that. And sometimes they're very different and the parent needs to hear that as well.
And another place where I find a lot of disagreement is present levels. Parents get really angry when they say, my kid can do this. And when I was a principal at the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and I learned really quickly that, and I would tell parents ahead of time, look, your information is valid, and we need to know that. The teacher isn't wrong. This is what the teacher sees. This is what you need to see, because we know there are kids that can't generalize from one setting to the other. So my OT needs to know that they never use a fork at home, but they use it every day at school. That's information we can both use. You can say at home, right? Oh, the OT says that you use your fork. Can you show me how? Because I see parents get so angry when they think that the teacher is lying. Yeah. And if you kind of can tell them, it's good information. Your information is just as good, and we would write it in. It's information for both sides to kind of help with that piece that it's not lying. It's information that we all need.
All right, what about the barriers that you tend to see? And again, this is being videotaped, so no school names or anything like that. But what are the things that tend to come up in IEP meetings?
I think for us, it would be programming and having schools think outside of the box for programming, and that just because these are the different tracks we have in the school doesn't mean those are the only ways to do things. And we've been a lot more successful when we have been able to, really think outside of that box and do some creative programming.
Yeah, so get your steps in. I would say one thing besides that physical environment being so important, and Kelly, you're right, that programming, thinking outside the box, allowing enough time for the meeting. Because I totally, and our staff, we really talk about schools have timeframes, and we understand that. And parents have timeframes, and we understand that. And it can go both ways. It can be a parent not allowing enough time or a school, but that'd be one thing that I would really see as particularly for involved case conference, for an annual review. Sometimes either side will say, well, there was only 30 minutes for this. I don't know how you do an annual case review in 30 minutes, but just allotting enough time and setting that environment to be welcoming to everybody, because it goes both ways, because we want the school personnel to feel comfortable to be able to share, and that parent to be able to share. So I think some of those things are particular barriers.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do at the start of our facilitated meetings is set the drop dead time, that we have to stop. Like, who is the first person that is going to have to leave this meeting that needs to stay in the room the whole time? Because what we don't want is, well, I have this meeting in an hour, so I'm going to step out for a while, and then I'm going to come back, and then people are coming and going, and bus duty, and all this kind of stuff happening. And again, I think the relationship kind of falls apart when that happens, because it looks like you don't care enough to be here, and we know we're all busy. But if we set that deadline ahead of time that says, noon is our stopping point, and when it's quarter till, I, as the facilitator, am going to say, okay, we're almost at noon. Do you think we're going to be done? Because if we're not, we need to wrap this up and schedule a next meeting to continue the process, so that nobody feels like we just have to suddenly at the end tie up all the loose ends. And I've been to tons of case conferences where we kind of run out of time, and the teacher says, you know what, I'll finish this up later, and then I'll send it home, and if you're okay with it, you sign it and send it back. That happens on the regular. I mean, it really does. And I know why it does, because we're scrambling to meet deadlines. We've got 30, 40, 50 kids sometimes on a caseload that you've got to get all these meetings done, and only so many hours in the day, and probably only a couple of days that maybe your administrator says, I'll get you a sub and let you have meetings. But it's just important. For some of our parents, meetings may take 6 hours before they're all said and done, but those are 6 valuable hours rather than a quick meeting that resulted in a due process. Any other things that you guys are seeing out there? Big issues that keep coming up over and over again? Any of the states that you're in, even if you've not been to one, that use facilitated IEP regularly? Like, do any of you know if your state has it?
Our state has it, but in a sense, we have almost have a modified form, because the majority of our districts use a special ed co-op, and they send out a technical assistant supervisor who does all of the in-meeting input. We do all of our draft, but it's also where we get a lot of our ancillary services from. And so that technical assistant supervisor tends to facilitate the meetings and so we don't typically have to go through a state-sponsored, but there is one available if that has not been effective. Because sometimes the TAS has been around long enough that everyone sees them as part of the district. So even though they're not.
Anyone else know if your state has anything? Sometimes we just don't know. But I check out your Department of Ed website. A lot of times they might have some information there. But again, I just encourage you to check out our website, and specifically to click on the YouTube icon on our website. That'll take you to our YouTube channel. And then within that, you can search for effective case conference processes. But make sure when you do that you're doing the search bar that's within the YouTube channel, not just in general. And we have a day-long training that we recorded. You'd have to put up with listening to me for hours and hours and hours, but you can fast forward through parts. But and if anybody would like to have like the PowerPoint for that or anything like that, you just email us and we'll send you a PDF of that. But it goes through all these things that we do basically during a meeting, things that we try to keep in mind. Well, I know our time is running pretty short, but do you have any other questions? I think we have 5 minutes. Oh, there's your big 5 sign. 5 minutes that we can answer any questions that you might have related to facilitated IEP or anything else for that matter. I see a lot of people looking down like, okay, it's Saturday.
This might be a little specific, but I'm a general education teacher, and
You snuck in.
and I also have a daughter in the district with multiple complex disabilities and an IEP. It's been very difficult, I think, because I know all the rules and regulations, and they're not always getting followed. Have you ever facilitated like a district employee's child's IEP, and how is that bad for, or good for the relationship?
I think it's been really good, actually, because district employees often will say, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to get a bad reputation. But again, your primary role is to advocate for your child. I think that's a really important piece. And for us to come in as outside people and just let the conversation happen and to make sure that everyone gets heard, and that if you do have a concern, you're allowed to raise it respectfully, and they can respond respectfully. It's resulted in some really positive outcomes without a parent ever having to get nasty, right? Because that's the last thing that you want to do. Because I think we all feel like with our own kids, disabilities or not, when we raise a concern, we get that reputation as that parent. Right. None of us like dealing with that parent. But it's coming from a place of, I just want what's right for my child. And we've had probably 3 or 4 at least over time.
And I have gone to them too, where I think it just helps there's both sides, because for the school side, it's a neutral party too, and it stops that, okay, what are people going to think? There's this neutral party, we're just going to say what we need to say and do what we need to do and move on. So yes, I've done that many times.
Yeah, and I think it's a different tone to bring in a facilitator than, we have some really wonderful parent support people in the state. We have some that would be more of an advocate kind of role, and others that are just general support. But we have some fantastic ones. But when a parent calls and says, I'm bringing my advocate, that's a very different tone than, can we have this meeting facilitated? Because the advocate is there to make sure that the parent understands the information, but also to help the parent get the outcome they're looking for. Not all of them. I mean, in-source advocates are very trained to say, we're not here as advocates in that sense. We're here for education and support and things like that. The appropriate outcome.
For the process. It's the process. They're good at the process, really good.
But we do have a lot of outside advocates that are all about, let me help you get what you want. And that's not what a facilitator does. So I think it sets up just that different feeling. Well, thank you guys. We do have, you know what? If you want to get to that, you can scan that QR code. That'll take you right to those presentations on Effective Case Conference. I didn't realize I put that in there. You also have some information in your little booklet about continued learning opportunities for inclusive education, a free virtual learning community that will be across the state. You can sign up at the link. It's on page 16 of your little booklet that got you here. And we thank you for coming.
Thank you.